Good. I want to talk today about plot and story. And I think the best way to do that is through song. It's true. I'm going to sing to you. I'd ask you if that's okay, but you can't actually answer, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to sing to you. You ready? You ready? Okay, I haven't sung in a recorded fashion in quite some time, so I want to make sure that I get it right. Here it is. Exposition, conflict, crisis, 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 resolution, falling action, date, no, ma. Where did I learn this beautiful, beautiful song? I'm going to give credit to Mrs. Lohman. She was my high school drama teacher in my senior year. And Ms. Lohman sang that with such energy and such enthusiasm and such dynamic energy that I've remembered it. It's been a few years since my senior year of high school. So what did I just sing? I sang the parts to a story, right? Exposition, conflict, crisis, 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 resolution, falling action, denouement. These are the parts that make up a story. And so I want us to kind of talk about what these different parts are. The book talks about the different elements. It talks about the things that differ between a story and a plot. But I want to just kind of talk about the basic elements here, and then we can talk about some of the aspects of these things down below. So let's talk about exposition. What's exposition? It is what we do to set up a story. It's the things that we do to set the pieces in motion so that we know where things are supposed to go. That's exposition. That is making sure that the reader has enough background to know where we're going to go next. It's table setting, essentially. It's essential, mostly. Even if you're jumping right into the story, there's probably some exposition. You don't want to get caught up. Nobody wants too much exposition. If a story has too much exposition, what does that mean? Well, it means that I'm going to get bored. Then you're spending too much time telling me the background information before jumping into the stuff that really matters. So the exposition part of my song, yeah, I'll sing individual words, is crucial here because it's setting things up. But you do too much, and then we get into the realm of problems. After exposition comes conflict. What's conflict? You need conflict in order to propel a story forward. Everything has to have conflict. Something needs to be at stake. This can be big or this can be smaller, but something should be at stake. And so when we talk about conflict, I'm talking about the thing that this story is depending upon. The thing that is going to make us care about what's going on, right? On 282 of our textbook, you can't read about a plot without running into that word conflict. A story or novel must have conflict, we're told, or it doesn't or can't hold the reader's interest. This is true. A story or novel without conflict is a story or novel without much of anything interesting happening in it. Remember what we talked about like on the first day? That when you choose to write something, you're choosing when in a given character's life that you're going to write about it. And what you choose is almost assuredly based upon the stuff that's going on in that person's life. Remember I said, I think on our first night, you have to ask this question of why tonight? Why is this the moment that you've chosen to start your story? And what's happening on this night that makes it so necessary that this is the moment in which we begin this tale? In some cases, it's because that's where the conflict is. If you have a story without conflict, it's going to be hard to get invested because it doesn't feel like anything's at stake. Now, your conflict doesn't have to be earth-shattering. It doesn't have to be this big, huge thing and that the fate of the entire universe rests upon. It can be something small, but it has to be something that matters to the characters. There has to be something at stake. Because as it says in the textbook, the word conflict often is the problem because people hear that and they think of violent conflict. They think of drama that is intense and in your face and aggressive. And it could be that, your conflict could be something that is related to war or something major and violent and aggressive, or it might not. It might end up with something that is much more intimate or smaller scale, but still important. So the problem with the word conflict is often that we think of conflict as aggressive, violent, war-related. And it could be, but it doesn't have to be. So, we've set it up. Exposition to set things up. Exposition to set the stage. The conflict. We need to know what's at stake here. What's going on. Then we need crises. I believe I sang the word crisis multiple times. That there have to be things in the way for the character to have to overcome. We have to have multiple crises. If we have just one, it's probably not going to feel satisfactory enough. So think about the way that we look at a classic work like the Odyssey. The backstory is that Odysseus is coming back from fighting in the war. He's on his way back home, and he gets kind of lost. He gets stuck. He gets derailed. That's the conflict. We get the backstory. We have the exposition setting up that he's coming home. Then we get the conflict. The conflict is he needs to get home, but he can't. The conflict gets amped up because if he doesn't get home by a certain time, then his wife is going to potentially have to marry somebody else because he's going to be considered long dead. So there are many, many suitors that are at Penelope's house, and they want to marry him, and Odysseus is on his way back to try to get to her. He gets derailed in many different places. Those are the crises. They're different scenarios that he has to face in order to get to where he needs to go. In Indiana Jones, the first one, Raiders of the Lost Ark, the exposition is that there's the Lost Ark of the Covenant that the Nazis are trying to get. It's setting up the story. That's what we begin with. Then the conflict is that Indy has to go to try to get it from the bad guys. He also needs to get help from an ex-girlfriend who does not like him very much, but they have to work together in order to get it done. There's your basic conflict. The crises, well, they're all over the place. The crises include being attacked at the marketplace and Marion, the girlfriend, being kidnapped and taken away. That's a crisis. Another crisis occurs when Indy's trying to find the Well of the Souls in order to figure out where the Ark of the Covenant is buried, and he then gets bad guys everywhere. There's crises all over the place. The Ark gets taken and loaded onto a truck, and Indy has to deal with that. So there are crises that happen, and it's typically more than one. We're looking at kind of dramatic adventure examples, but they don't have to be. Your crises can be more intimate. They can be more personal than this. So those are the crisis points, and there are typically more than one. You might have more than one conflict in a longer piece, but typically in a shorter piece, you can live with that one, and that one conflict is going to be what carries you through. But even with one conflict, you're going to have multiple crises that will carry us through and move us forward as we go. So those are the basics. Then we have I think in the song it's just the word resolution, but we can look at climax too. That a climax is the point in which we solve the conflict, essentially. That something happens that allows us to solve the conflict. In Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, the climax of the action and the things that are going on is when the Nazis open up the Ark of the Covenant, and Indy and Marion close their eyes. Spoilers, right? Sorry. It came out in 1981. You're good. But that's the climax, right? That's the dramatic stuff that reaches the point that we need to go. In the Odyssey, Odysseus makes it back home, and he is ready to try to fight back against these suitors. He and his son Telemachus are armed with arrows, and there's a wonderful moment toward one of the books at the end. It's separated into essentially chapters, but they're called books, in which Odysseus and Telemachus are ready with their arrows. This is the best I can do with an arrow pose on camera. And they're about to go in there to take out all of these awful suitors who are trying to take Penelope away from Odysseus. And then the next chapter begins, and they take them all out. And it's satisfying, sort of. And so those are the climaxes. It's the point of the action in which we reach the high point in which the main action has occurred, and then everything kind of starts to slide down. That's our climax, our resolution. Then I mentioned a couple terms: falling action and denouement. They essentially mean the same thing, but they're cool and they sound good in song. So a falling action is after the hero or whomever, the protagonist, has fulfilled the conflict and gotten past it. Then we have that sort of cool down moment where we can reflect upon what's happening. The denouement is essentially it's the end. And we reach that end point, and we can kind of figure out what happens next. And so a lot of movies and books will give us this point of that the action has reached its pinnacle, reached its climax, and then we spend time kind of taking into account what has happened. The Harry Potter books do this a lot, that we end many books with 100 pages of Dumbledore telling Harry what just happened. Those are kind of the falling actions of this. It's allowing us to have context for what has occurred and to understand the importance of what we've just read and gone through. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, because I've stuck with that example all the way through, it's my favorite movie. I'm allowed. In that one, after they have closed their eyes and the evil spirits have come out of the Ark of the Covenant, we get Marion and Indy in an embrace. They're happy. They're together. They've made up all their terrible things. Nothing like chasing biblical artifacts and racing and fighting Nazis to make you feel better and rekindle a love. And then finally, the last scene is the total falling action, because we see Indy talking to bureaucrats about what happens to the Ark. And the government bureaucrats tell Indy that it's fine, it's being taken care of, it's being researched. And Indy says, you don't know what you've got in there, you've got to be careful. That's a terrible Harrison Ford. That's my attempt. And they say that we've got top men working on it. Top men. And Indy's mad because he doesn't think the government is treating it correctly. And then the final shot, the final falling action, the last point. Because as far as we're really concerned, the movie can end on that moment where Indy and Marion have survived, but it wants to give us this final moment so we know the fate of the Ark, because we're wondering about that. We see it's in a giant warehouse and no one's taking care of it. And it's probably not a good thing to have in a giant warehouse. And we found out many years later in that movie where Indy goes in a refrigerator during a nuclear explosion that it's in Area 51. And all of our friends who were going to raid Area 51 and find the Ark of the Covenant for us didn't come through last September. For shame. But sometimes, a story can bypass the falling action. That's okay. Sometimes stories end on very dramatic moments and they just linger there. I'm going to use another film example from the late 70s, early 80s. My apologies. Rocky, the first Rocky movie. The first Rocky movie ends with Rocky having gone the distance against Apollo Creed. Remember, Rocky in that first movie, this is before he's defeated the giant Russians and ended the Cold War. A giant Russian, there's just one, but he could have taken two. But he ends up just wanting to prove to himself that he's not a bum. Right, that Rocky he's a washed up boxer. He gets the shot against the champ. He just wants to prove he can go the distance. And in the first Rocky movie, he does. He goes the full, whatever it is, 12, 15 rounds against the champ. And so the last moment of it is him at the end. He's done it. He went the distance. You can hear them announcing who won the fight after the judges made the final decision. It doesn't matter to us because we just wanted to see Rocky do it. And so the cameras are spinning around. It's a brilliant ending. The cameras are moving around to follow Rocky as he's looking around. He's looking for Adrian, his girlfriend and his future wife. And he's like, Adrian. And she's looking for him. And they get together and they hug. And then it ends. And that's it. Could we have gone the next day to see how Rocky's reflected upon what happened? Could we have found out like the way that the public was reacting? Of course we could have. In most movies we would have. But not here. It takes us to the highest possible point in this person's life. So we thought, again, he does superhuman things later. But we get to what seems like the highest possible point in this character's life, and then we end it. So there isn't a resolution or falling action. It kind of ends with climax. So those are basic things that I want you to think about when we're telling stories. You want to make sure you have these things and go through. Now, the story that we read for this week is Sonny's Blues. And Sonny's Blues is one of my favorite short stories, and I hope you like it or have liked it. But one thing that the book does that's very, very cool is analyzing plot points. So it takes us through all of Sonny's Blues. And what makes Sonny's Blues such an interesting story to discuss in terms of plot is that it moves around via flashbacks a lot. So we'll get things that are in the present day, but then we get flashbacks to get our narrator thinking about other things, and then we'll go back to the present day and we'll go back and we'll have him reflecting on things through memory. Remember, we talked about things that characters can do. They can remember things. And then we also can have him then jump to having conversations with Sonny and then remembering things that he and Sonny did, remember conversations in which his mother was remembering things to tell him. So Sonny's Blues is a really fascinating story to look at through plot, because there are really engaging things. It's a long story, but it's a really rewarding one, and I certainly hope that you do go through it and think about what we can learn from it. And one of the questions the book asks at the end is, what effect is created by telling certain aspects of the story out of sequence? How would this be a different story if events were simply told in chronological order? It makes it feel sort of stream of consciousness, almost like Sonny's brother, the narrator, learns one thing, and it makes him think about this thing that happened in the past, and then that thing makes him think of something else, and he gets back in the moment, and he's reflecting on this dynamic with Sonny. So all of these different things are beneficial to understanding the full grasp of what's going on in the story. So it's really valuable. Film does this sometimes too, right? I'm going to make a much more recent film reference now. I'm going to go to 1994's Pulp Fiction. It's not that recent. I gotcha. But 1994's Pulp Fiction, that's a movie that very famously is told out of sequence. And the same kind of questions can come up for that. Is this a different movie if it's told in sequential order? If that movie is told in sequential order, is it as interesting as it is in its current form? Think about this. So as far as comments that I want to get back from you underneath here, talk about your relationship with story. How much do you think about plot and story? Also, I didn't spend as much time talking through some of the stuff that's in our section here that we read for today as I have, but give me responses to comments that are in the book, things that you read in the books that you thought were particularly interesting. Also, maybe some thoughts on causality and plot versus story that she talks about in here, which are really engaging. And maybe also some thoughts about Baldwin's story, Sonny's Blues, if you're so inclined. So put those below. And hopefully I'll have some stories to share with you for our next workshop in the next couple days. And if you've got any other questions, thoughts, feedback, please let me know. I'm happy to help out in whatever way I can. So enjoy your fall break. I guess we have a fall break. It's my daughter's birthday on Friday, so I told her that that's why everybody gets a day off. She's 8, or she's going to be 8. She knows better. That's not why, but that's why I'm taking the Friday off. It's because it's my daughter's 8th birthday. You can take it off for that reason too. We can also take that day off because the USU is allowing us to, which feels like the better reason. But remember my song. You can play it back. I'm not going to sing it again because I don't think I can get my voice quite at that moment as I did at the beginning. I had to start up. You didn't realize it, but I was like gargling salt water and drinking all sorts of things to prep myself for this. That's not true because you heard me sing and you know that's not true. But go through, come up with thoughts on things that you want to talk about. And if you are somebody who is committed to short story or an excerpt for our next workshop, get it to me. Thank you.